Hey, and welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be setting up the automatic and manual transmission. So with that, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is head over to the inputs, and then in here, we're going to right click, input action. We're going to call this IA underscore shift up. And then with it selected, we're going to control D and then just rename this to shift down. And then we don't need to do anything in either one of those. We're just going to save everything. And then we're going to open up the IMC inputs. And then we're going to add two new mappings. So the first one is going to be the shift up. And then for this one, I'm going to use the left shift button. And then the second one is going to be the shift down. And then for this one, I'm going to use the left control. So I'm going to save everything, close this. And then we're going to go to content, vehicle, parent vehicle, open up the parent vehicle blueprint. And then we're just going to find a empty spot somewhere. We're going to right click, then we're going to create a custom event. And then this custom event, we're going to call it the auto transmission. And then we're going to leave that as is for now. What we're going to do is we're going to add a couple functions. So the first function we're going to add is the load transmission. In here, we're going to drag off and then we look for does save game exist. The save game we're looking for is the transmission. From the return, we're going to hold B, left click to create a branch, connect to the return value and the execution pin. From the true, drag off, gonna load game from slot. The slot is the transmission. From the return, drag off and then cost to BP save game. From the as BP save game, drag off and then we're gonna get auto. From the get auto, drag off, and then we're gonna promote this to a variable. We're gonna leave it as is, connect the execution pin, and then from the set, the red pin, we're gonna drag off, then look for a branch. And then from the true, we're going to call the auto transmission custom event we created. We're going to compile and save. Then we're going to create another function. This function is going to be the set max gears. And then in here, we're going to right click and then get as BPGI game, drag off, and then get BPS garage cars, drag off from there, get a reference. From the turquoise pin, drag off and then get vehicle ID. From the get, drag off and then we're going to break, expand it, look for the max gears, drag off from there and then promote this to a variable. We're going to leave that as is as well. Connect the execution pin, select the break, hide unconnected, and then compile and save. We're going to create another function. And then this one is going to be load shift time. And then from here, we're just going to go to the set max gears, select everything up to the break, Control C, go back to the load shift time, Control V, select the break, and then we're going to scroll down until we find the shift time and shift time multiplier. And then from the shift time, drag off, we're going to multiply this by the shift time multiplier, select the break, hide unconnected, and then from the multiplier, we're going to drag off and then promote this to a variable. And then this variable, we're going to call this shift time. Then we're going to connect the execution pin, compile and save. And then we're going to create yet another function. And then this one is we're going to call this current RPM. In here, we're going to control V because we already have a portion of the code. Select the break, delete that from the get, drag off, and then we're going to set members. The member we're setting is the current RPM. So we're going to select that one. And then how we're going to do that is we're going to right click just below the code and then we're going to get as chaos wheeled vehicle movement component. And then from there, we're going to drag off and then get engine rotation speed. And then we're going to connect this to the current RPM and then connect the execution pin. Then we're going to compile, save, add to the event graph. And then on the event tick, we're going to drag in the current RPM function we created So drag this in after the camera shake. And then what we're going to do is here by the automatic transmission, from the square pin, we're going to drag off and then we're going to set timer by event. And the time is going to be 0.02. Make sure that it is looping. As much as possible, you want to keep things off the event tick, because the more things that are on there, the lower your performance is going to be. And then from the set timer by event, we're going to hold B, create a branch, left click, connect the execution pin. From the condition, drag off promote to a variable. I'm going to call this gear change. And then we're also going to create another variable. Just create another variable. I'm going to call this gear. It's going to be of type integer. This is going to temporarily hold the vehicle's current gear. Select the gear change boolean we created, and then just make sure, okay, we need to compile first. Compile, and then just make sure that it is set to false to start off with. And then what we're going to do is we're going to control V to get the piece of code we've been using up until now, the SBPGI game, garage cars, vehicle ID, and then the get. Select the break, and then what we're going to get is the current RPM, the shift up RPM, the shift down RPM, and then the max gears as well. What we're going to do is we're going to select the gear variable, hold control, drag that in, and then we're going to select the current RPM, drag off from there, and we're going to look for greater than equal to. Then from the shift up RPM, connect that to the lower pin. Then we're going to go from the gear, drag off, and then we're going to look for lesser than. And then if it's lesser than the max gears, and then from the gear again, drag off, and then look for greater than. And then if it's greater than 0, so we're going to select the gear variable, just select that. And then by its default value, we need to set this to 1. There is a little bit of a hiccup with the code in that if you're in neutral at any point, then it just won't get you out of neutral. I'm assuming that is because when the car is in neutral, the game just doesn't collect any RPM because there is no power being fed into the car. Although when you're standing still, then you can technically rev the car. But for some reason, it doesn't work the same with changing up gears, which is also why we have the set target gear to a 1 custom event that we created earlier, so that we can overcome that. So then from here, I'm gonna select the top greater than equal to, drag off from there, then we'll look for AND boolean. I'm gonna add a pin, connect the other two to the AND as well. Then I'm gonna hold B, left click to create a branch, connect that to the condition. Then we're gonna connect this to the false. And then from the true by the branch, drag off, and then we're gonna set gear change. We're gonna set this to true. And then after that, we're gonna drag in the vehicle movement component, hold control, drag that in, drag off from there, and then set target gear, connect the execution pin, leave it at 0, and then check the immediate, drag off from the vehicle movement component, and then we're gonna set throttle input to 0, connect the execution pin, and then we'll take the shift time variable, hold control, drag that in. From the shift time, drag off, and then we're gonna look for delay, connect the execution pin, and then we want to drag in the gear variable, hold control, drag this in. From the gear variable, drag off, and then look for add, and then we're gonna add 1, and then from the add, drag off, and then we're gonna set gear, connect the execution pin. If it's a bit confusing, you can rename the gear variable to current gear. I think we should actually just do that. Just F2 and then just add current, because it is going to hold the current gear temporarily for as long as the car is in play. And then after that, we're going to select the vehicle movement component and the set target gear. Select them both. Control D. connect that after the set current gear. And then we're going to drag in the current gear variable again, drag this and drop this on the gear number. And then after the set target gear, we're going to drag off and then we're going to set gear change to false. And then that is it for the shift up. So now we're just going to do the shift down. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the current RPM by the brake, drag off, and then we're going to look for lesser than equal to. If it's lesser than equal to the shift down RPM, and then also we're going to drag in the current gear variable again, hold control, drag this in, drag off from there. I'm going to look for, is it greater than -1, or not -1, 1, my bad. Drag off from the lesser than equal to, and we look for and boolean, connect that, and then hold B, left click to create a branch. And then right after the gear change branch, the first one, before we actually work with the code, hold S, left click to create a sequence, connect that to the false. By the then one, connect this to the code for the shift up, and then the not the then one, the then zero. So then zero goes to shift up, then one goes to the shift down code, connect the conditions to the branch, and then we're just going to copy the code from the set change after the branch, everything after that, Control D. Then we're going to connect this to the true, and then we're going to make a change here by the current gear add, select the add, remove that, drag off, and then look for subtract. So we're going to subtract 1, connect that to the set current gear, and then the code pretty much remains the same. What you can do is by the delay, you can remove the shift time if you want to. I'm not going to, I'm going to leave it as is. That's mostly just because the cars that I'm using in the tutorial do have pretty fast shift times, but if you want, say for example, if you're trying to mimic a manual transmission, you can make it so that the shift up times are that of a manual car, but then the shift down can be something like an in between, maybe like a 0.02 or something. If you don't want to wait the full, I don't know, what is it, like 0.7 of a second to shift gears in a manual transmission. So that is the code for the automatic transmission. We're going to compile and then save. So now we're going to go and test this out. Just make sure that the current gear variable, its default value is set to 1, and then the gear change is set to false. Just going to exit the workshop, press yes. One thing I did forget to do, just go out here. In the parent vehicle, select that. In the vehicle movement component, in the details, we're just gonna search for auto. So you do want to make sure that the automatic transmission is disabled. By default, it's set to true, so make sure it is set to false. So I've got to show that. Actually, I've got to change it back during my first video. So just make sure that the automatic transmission is set to false. Otherwise, there's going to be conflict. It is going to prioritize the chaos automatic transmission as opposed to the one that we created. Just gonna play through again, head to the workshop, yes. So you're just gonna see. So why did it not work? Did I make a mistake somewhere? Oh, I add, forgot to add the function to the configuration custom event. My bad on that. So just drag these out. And then we're gonna add the functions. The first one is the load transmission. Then we're gonna set the max gears. Then we'll load the shift time. Just make sure all these are connected. I forgot to do that. Just gonna compile and save. Head back to the workshop, play through. Okay, so it is changing, but it seems to be changing a bit too quickly because now we're in sixth gear, but only at 150 kilometers. On fourth seems to be a bit of a hiccup. with the code. Just going to check that out, see what the problem is. But it is working. Just need to make sure that it is not shifting through gears that quickly. All right, so after looking through the code a bit, I tried to make a couple changes and I changed for the shift up, the current RPM, shift up RPM, I made just greater than instead of a greater than equal to. And then the same for the current RPM shift down. Instead of a lesser than equal to, I just made it a lesser than, but it pretty much just gave me the exact same problem. Then also I tried to change the set timer. I put it to 0.1, didn't really change much of anything. The current RPM also, I just left it as is, but that also didn't change anything. And then what I did realize is that the code doesn't take into account when the tires are slipping. So I remember that if I just go to the current RPM, if I go from the set members, drag off, and then look for print string, and then go from the get engine RPM speed or get engine rotation speed, and then just connect this to the in string. It's gonna compile and save this, and then I'm just gonna play the level. So as you can see, the car is currently at its idle, and then when I pull away, the car shift is about 6,500 RPMs. So if I pull away, it shoots up to right about 6, 7. And if you look down at the RPMs, not the RPMs, the gears, right, it's going to go up to like fourth. So as you can see there, so what happened is it doesn't take into account the tires constantly spinning at that RPM. All it's concerned with is other conditions being met, which is um, where we at now? Down here. Is the current RPM greater than the shift up RPM? If that is true, the current gear is less than the max gears, and if the current gear is greater than 0, as long as these three conditions are being met, the car will attempt to, or at least the code will attempt to shift for as long as the event is being called every 100 milliseconds, right? So for as long as that's being met, then it's gonna continuously try and shift up the gears. Also, the current gear that I'm using, its shift time is about 150 milliseconds. So it's not that slow. So that's why the gear shifts seem that quickly. So for as long as these three conditions are being met, then it will always try to shift. That's why it stops at about fourth, fifth gear, because that is when there is no longer any power being, or there isn't enough power to sustain the tire slipping anymore. And then it finally drops down below the shift up RPM. So if I were to, for example, increase the amount of traction on the tires, then that would help, but that would also require me to start over. But the code does in fact work. It just doesn't account for a car constantly, or the car's tires constantly slipping beyond the shift up RPM. So it's gonna just continuously try to change. But apart from that, that is something I need to put into account for an updated version of the code, is that when the car's tires are slipping, it needs to not shift up. So that's another condition I might need to incorporate into a later version of the code. But when I do that, I will provide an updated version for the code. But other than that, the shift down does work because the car does start shifting down as soon as the current RPM is below the shift down RPM. So the code does work. It's just that little thing it doesn't take into account. And then now with that out the way, we're gonna be quickly gonna set up the manual transmission. So we're just gonna move the automatic a bit out the way, just place it over here. And then just below that, we're gonna right click and then we're gonna look for the shift up enhanced input event. And then just below that, we're gonna look for the shift down action event. So just make some space between them. So now that we have the two input actions, we're gonna go and create two functions. So the first function is going to be the shift up function, and then we're going to actually, that's fine. We can just duplicate the shift up for the shift down. They're fairly similar, just the difference is that the one is going to add, the other is going to subtract. What we're going to do is we are going to get the current gear variable, hold control, drag this in, and then when I drag off from there, and then we're going to look for is this less than the max gears. So take the max gears variable, drop this on the pin, and then hold B to create a branch, connect the condition, the execution pin, and then we're going to go from the current gear, drag off from there, then we're going to add a plus, and then we're going to add 1, and then from the branch true, drag off, and then we're going to set gear change, set this to true, then we're drag in the vehicle movement component, hold control, drag that in, drag off from there, and then we're going to set target gear, set this to 0, connect the execution pin, check the immediate box, and then from the vehicle movement component again, we're gonna drag off and then set throttle input to 0, and then from the add, we're gonna drag off from there, and then we're gonna set current gear, connect the execution pin, and then just add a redirect node, and then that is it for the shift up. It's gonna compile, save, and then we're going to select the shift up function, Control D, then we're just going to rename this to shift down, and then instead of add, we're going to subtract from the current gear, drag off, look for subtract, reconnect that, then we're going to subtract 1, and then for the shift down, we're going to remove the max gears, remove the lesser than, and then from the current gear, drag off and look for is it greater than -1, then we're going to connect that as the condition. So for as long as the current gear is larger than -1, we will be able to shift down. If the car is in reverse, which is the -1, then we will no longer be able to shift down at all. And then that will be it for the shift down. We're going to compile, head over to the event graph, and then in here, what we're going to do is we are going to drag in the auto variable, hold control, drag this in, drag off from there, add a branch, and then by the shift up input, expand that, and then we're going to go from the started, connect that to the branch, collapse that once again, select the branch, Control D, and then by the shift down also from the started, connect that to the branch, collapse that again, connect the auto to the branch connected to the shift down, and then if it is in fact not the automatic transmission, then we are going to take the shift up, drag this in, connect this to the false, the shift down, drag this in, connect that to the false. So if the load auto variable says that it is in fact false, meaning that the player is using the manual option, then we will allow the player to be able to shift up and down manually using the inputs. And then from there, we're going to take the shift time variable, hold control, drag this in, drag off from there, going to look for a delay, then we'll connect this to the shift up. You can do the same for the shift down, so I'm going to do that. Control D, connect it to the shift down, connect the shift time to the second delay, then we're going to drag in the vehicle movement component, hold control, drag this in, drag off, and then we're going to set target gear. And then we're going to, with the set target gear selected, Control D, connect it to the bottom. Remember to connect the vehicle movement component to the target for the second set target gear. We're going to drag in the current gear variable, drop this on the pin for the gear number for either one of the set target. Just going to connect it to both of them. And then after the set gear target, we're going to drag off from either one. Then we're going to set gear change to false. So once again, when the player presses either of the shift up or shift down buttons, it's first going to check whether the automatic variable is in the manual option, which is false. And then if the false is true, then it will allow the player to shift up or shift down. And then after the shift time of the car, it will then move on to the higher gear if the player has shifted up, or if the player has shifted down, it will then go to a lower gear. And then after that, it will set the gear change back to false, which will then allow the player to then once again go through the cycle. So with that, we are going to go and test it out. So compile, save, add to the workshop, maps, content maps. We're gonna head to the main menu where the settings widget is. Main menu, we're gonna go to settings, gameplay, automatic, set it to manual. I'm gonna go back, then we're gonna play. I'm gonna exit the workshop, yes. And then if I accelerate, the car should no longer change gears, it should just remain where it is. And then if I press, okay, let me just turn around real quick. Okay, so it stalls. I press shift, goes into second, press shift again, goes into third, shift again, then fourth, and I'm off the map. So we're just gonna do that again just to see if it does shift down, because clearly my driving is not that good. So I'm gonna go, drive, shift, shift again, it's in third. Okay, we still have the automatic reverse enabled. So we're gonna shift second, okay, shift into fourth, okay, in third, second, and then first. So we did shift down, and something went very wrong. But that's something we'll check out later. But other than that, the manual transmission does work. The car shifts up when we press the shift up button, and then it shifts down when we press the shift down button. So we do in fact know that the code does work. Let me just label this a comment. So we've tested out the manual and the automatic transmission. I just need to make a revised version of this that takes into account when the car's tires are slipping. And once I've done that, I will then come back and make an updated video. But with that, that brings us to the end of this video. And until the next one.